class. Today, we're going to dive back into some history and we're going to talk about the Great Harlem Renaissance. It's important to mention what took place before the Harlem Renaissance in the late 1910s to mid 1930s, and that was the Great Migration, which took place between 1916 and 1920, also totaling the 1920s through the 1970s. The late migration started in the late 1910s, which was a direct result of World War I, which was happening around the time. A lot of these black folks, they were migrating to the north so that they can take up jobs to manufacture supplies for troops overseas. And a lot of families also moved away from the racist South, with Jim Crow laws still being present and implemented into the system. With the surge of African American migration, there was a competition for housing spaces, which enraged a lot of white folks. A lot of white landlords would either refuse to sell property to black families or would raise the rent to the point where it wasn't affordable and they couldn't live in it anymore. Ultimately, African American families were forced to build their own communities in big cities, which gave rise to their urban black culture. As a result of building new communities, one of the most prominent cities was Harlem, which housed around 200,000 African Americans. This kickstarted the Harlem Renaissance, which revolutionized music, writing, and black culture, and detailed and really expanded the black experience in America. When reading up on the Harlem Renaissance, there were three key figures or major artists that stuck out to me the most, and that was Countee Cullen, Langston Hughes, and James Weldon Johnson. Countee Cullen was born on May 30th, 1903. Now, while a lot of his early childhood or where he specifically was born hasn't been specified and is often speculated, we do know that he moved to New York at age 9. He was raised by his grandmother until she passed away when he was 15. He was later then adopted by Reverend F.A. Cullen, who ultimately became the Harlem chapter of the NAACP. Being a novelist and a playwright, he was also a children's author while he was a teacher in his later years. He often wrote in a traditional style that was frowned upon by many of his black counterparts, but he argued that it was a way for him to break down barriers and distinguish himself as an artist, not just a black artist. Langston Hughes was a poet and a social activist and was known as one of the most prominent figures during the Harlem Renaissance. He was born in Joplin, Missouri on the 1st of February 1902 and lived there for most of his childhood until he moved with his mother and his stepfather in Cleveland, Ohio at 13 years old. While living in Cleveland and in high school, he started writing poetry and which detailed his black experiences in America. After graduating high school in 1920, he lived with his father in Mexico, where he wrote The Negro Speaks of Rivers, which also was a free verse poem that was published in The Crisis, created by W.E.B. Du Bois. He also would attend the University of Columbia, New York, but dropped out after a year due to racial tensions in the space. He traveled all across the world and eventually came across the well-known poet named Vachel Lindsay, who formally introduced him into the literary community. He's known for revolutionizing poetry and became one of the first innovators of jazz poetry, not just only talking about jazz itself in his writings, but also using words that would mimic certain rhythms that you would hear in music, including jazz. James Weldon Johnson was a writer and civil rights activist, but he was also a man of many capabilities. Born in 1871 in Jacksonville, Florida, his parents were Bohemian immigrants who instilled the importance of education into him at a very young age. He definitely took this into consideration and excelled in school, attended Atlanta University at age 16, and graduated in 1894. He also studied law in 1896 and within 2 years passed the bar exam and became the first black lawyer since the Reconstruction era. He would soon then gain an interest in writing music with his brother Rosamond, and together they migrated to New York and sold their writings to Broadway performers, making roughly around $10,000 a year. One of his most famous works came in 1900 when he wrote the poem Lift Every Voice and Sing, which today is regarded as the Black national anthem. These poems on the screen are highly regarded as some of the most pivotal pieces of work during the Harlem Renaissance. County Cullen, Langston Hughes, and James Weldon Johnson left a body of work that capitalized the greatness that Black people hold. These key figures made Black folks realize their true potential and reminded them that regardless of any negative influence that might hinder them, such as racism, stereotypes, or their environment, they are capable of leaving a legacy that will touch the hearts of their people for generations to come.